Hello, everybody. I am Mrs. Poppet, and this is my place. Isn't it a wonderful day for a story? Well, I have picked out one that is really good, and I think you're going to like it. It is called The Goose Girl at the Well. Shall we read it now? Okay. The Goose Girl at the Well. Once upon a time there lived a very old woman who lived with her flock of geese in a remote clearing among the mountains. She had a little house in the clearing, which was surrounded by a large forest. Every morning the old woman hobbled among the trees, collecting grass for her geese and picking wild fruit. She carried everything she gathered on her back. Anyone watching would have thought that the heavy load must have weighed such an old, bent woman to the ground, but she never failed to bring her burden home. She was always courteous, but local people avoided meeting her if they could help it, taking a roundabout way as they walked through the forest. When a father and his sons passed her, he would whisper to them, "Beware of that old woman. She has claws beneath her gloves, and she is a witch." One morning, a handsome young man was traveling through the forest. The sun shone brightly, the birds sang, a cool breeze crept through the leaves, and he was full of joy and gladness. He saw the old woman kneeling on the ground cutting grass with a sickle. She had already thrust a whole load into her cloth, and near it stood 2 baskets filled with wild apples and pears. "But, good woman," said he, "how will you carry all that?"
"I must carry it, dear sir," she answered. "Rich folks' children have no need to do such things, but peasant folk, the saying goes, don't look behind you. You'll only see how crooked your back is."
He remained standing by her and asked him to help her with her load.
"You still have a straight back and young legs. It would be a trifle to you. Besides, my house is not far from here. It stands behind the hill. How soon you could bound up there."
The young man took compassion on the old woman. "My father is not a peasant," he replied, "but a rich count. Nevertheless, so that you may know it is not only peasants who can carry things, I will take your bundle."
"If you will give it a try," she asked, "I shall be very glad. You will certainly have to walk for an hour, but what's that matter to you? And you will carry the apples and pears as well?"
An hour's walk seemed a little more serious to the young man, but the old woman would not let him reconsider. She packed the bundle on his back and hung the 2 baskets on his arm.
"See, it's quite light," she said.
"No, it is not light," answered the Count, and pulled a rueful face. "In truth, the bundle weighs as if it were full of cobblestones, and the apples and pears are as heavy as lead. I can scarcely breathe." He had a mind to put everything down again, but the old woman would not allow it.
"Just look," she said mockingly. "The young gentleman will not carry what I, an old woman, have so often dragged along. You are really fine with words, but when it comes to action, you want to take to your heels."
While he walked on level ground, the load was bearable, but when they came to the hill and had to climb, the stones rolled under his feet as if they were alive. It was beyond his strength. "I can go no further," he said. "I want to rest a little."
"Not here," answered the old woman. "When we have arrived at our journey's end, you can rest. But now you must go forward. Who knew what good it would do you?"
"Old woman, you are becoming shameless," said the Count, trying to throw off the bundle, but it stuck fast to his back like it had grown there. He turned and twisted, could not get rid of it. The old woman laughed at this, and sprang about quite delightedly.
"Don't get angry, dear sir," she said. "You are growing as red in the face as a turkey. Carry your bundle patiently. I will give you a good present when we get home."
What could he do? He was obliged to submit and crawl along patiently behind the old woman. She seemed to grow more and more nimble, and his burden still heavier. All at once she jumped on top of the bundle. The youth's knees trembled, but he did not go on. The old woman hit him on the legs with stinging nettles if he didn't keep going. Groaning continually, he climbed the mountain, reaching the old woman's house just as he was about to drop. When the geese saw the old woman, They flapped their wings and stretched out their necks and ran to meet her, cackling. Behind the flock walked a servant woman, strong and big but ugly as night. "Hello, good mother," she said to the old woman.
"Hello, my dear daughter," she answered. "I have met this kind gentleman who has carried my burden for me. He even carried me back when I was tired. The way, though, has not seemed so long to us. We have been merry and been cracking jokes with each other all the time."
At last the old woman slid down, took the bundle from the young man's back and the baskets from his arm, looked at him quite kindly, and said,
"Now seat yourself on the bench by the door and rest. You have fairly earned your wages, and they shall not be wanting."
Then she said to the goose girl,
"Go into the house, my dear daughter. It is not right for you to be alone with the young gentleman. He might fall in love with you."
The Count didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Such a sweetheart as that," thought he, "could not touch my heart." The old woman stroked her geese as if they were children, and then went into the house with her daughter. The youth laid down on the bench under a wild apple tree. The air was warm and mild. Across the clearing stretched a green meadow, which was dotted with cowslips, wild thyme, and 1,000 other flowers. Through it rippled a clear brook, on which the sun sparkled, and the white geese went walking back and forth, or paddled in the water. "It is quite delightful here," he said, "but I am so tired I cannot keep my eyes open. I will sleep a little. I only hope a gust of wind does not come and blow my legs off my body, for they are as rotten as old sticks." When he had slept a while, the old woman came back and shook him awake.
"I have certainly treated you badly," she said. "Still, you will live. You have no need of money and land, so here is something else for you."
She thrust a green crystal box into his hand, cut from a single emerald.
Take great care of it," said she. "It will bring you good fortune."
The Count sprang up, feeling quite recovered. He thanked the old woman for her present and set off without looking back at her or her daughter. He wandered in the mountains and the forest for 3 days before he reached a large town. As no one knew him, he was led into the royal palace where the king and queen were sitting on their thrones. The Count fell on one knee, drew the emerald box out of his pocket, and laid it at the queen's feet. Hardly had she opened it and looked inside than she fell down as if dead. The Count was seized by the king's servants and was being led to prison, when the queen revived and ordered them to release him. She said she wished to speak to him in private. When the queen was alone, she began to weep bitterly and said, "Of what use to me are all the splendors and honors with which I am surrounded? Every morning I wake in pain and sorrow. I had 3 daughters. The youngest was so beautiful that the whole world looked on her as a wonder. Her skin was as white as snow, her cheeks as rosy as apple blossoms, and her hair as radiant as sunbeams. When she cried, pearls and jewels fell from her eyes instead of tears. When she was 15 years old, the king summoned all 3 sisters to come before his throne. You should have seen how all the people gazed when the youngest entered. It was just as if the sun were rising. Then the king said, 'My daughters, I know not when my last day may come. Today I will decide what each of you will receive at my death. You all love me, but one of you, who loves me the best, shall receive the most.' Each of them said she loved him the best. 'Can you not express,' said the king, 'how much you love me?' The eldest spoke, 'I love my father as dearly as the sweetest sugar.' The second, 'I love my father as dearly as my prettiest dress.' But the youngest was silent. The father said, 'And you, dearest child, how much do you love me?' 'I cannot find a comparison for my love,' she said. But her father insisted that she name something. At last she said, 'Even the best food cannot please me without salt, and therefore I love my father like salt.' When the king heard this, he fell into an angry passion and said, 'If you love me like salt,
Your love shall be repaid with salt." He divided his kingdom between the two older sisters and ordered that a sack of salt be bound to the back of the youngest, and that she be taken into the wild forest. "We all begged and prayed for her," said the queen, "but the king's fury did not soften. How she cried when she had to leave us! The whole road was strewn with pearls that flowed from her eyes. The king soon repented of his severity and had the forest searched for the poor child, but no one could find her. When I think that the wild beasts have devoured her, I know not how to contain my sorrow. I hold on to the hope that she is still alive and may have hidden herself in a cave or found shelter with some compassionate people. When I opened your little emerald box, a pearl lay inside exactly like those which used to fall from my daughter's eyes. You can imagine how the sight of it stirred my heart. You must tell me how you came to get this pearl."
The count told her that he had received the box from an old woman in the forest, who had appeared very strange to him and must be a witch, but he had neither seen nor heard anything of her daughter. The king and queen resolved to seek out the old woman. Where the pearl had been, they hoped to have news of their youngest child. The old woman was sitting in a lonely clearing at her spinning wheel. It was dusk, and the geese were coming home from the pasture, uttering their hoarse cries. Soon afterward the servant daughter also entered. They both sat spinning for a while until they heard an owl cry, "Hoo! Hoo!" 3 times. "Hoo! Hoo! Hoo! Hoo!" The old woman said,
"Now, my young daughter, it is time for you to go out and do your work."
The ugly girl rose and went out to the meadows and into a valley. Eventually she came to a well. The moon had risen. The girl removed a skin that covered her face, and then bent down to the well and began to wash herself. How she was changed! When the gray mask fell off, her golden hair broke forth like sunbeams. Her eyes shone out as brightly as the stars in heaven, and her cheeks bloomed a soft red like an apple blossom. But the beautiful girl was sad. She wept bitterly. One tear after another rolled through her long hair to the ground. There she sat until, startled by a crack in a bough of a nearby tree, she sprang up like a deer hearing a gunshot, put on the old skin, and sprinted away. When she reached home, trembling, she found the old woman standing on the threshold. The servant daughter was about to relate what had happened, but the old woman laughed kindly, "Ha ha!" and said,
"I already know everything. Do you not remember that it is 3 years today since you came to me? Your time is up and we must part."
The girl was terrified.
"Alas, where shall I go? I have no home to go to. Do not send me away."
The old woman could not tell the girl what lay before her.
"My stay here is over," she said to her, "and when I go, the house and parlor must be clean. Therefore we shall sweep. Do not worry, you will have a roof to shelter you, and I will give you a reward for your work that will keep you content. Go upstairs, take the skin off your face, and put on the silken gown you wore when you first arrived. Then wait until I call you."
The king and the queen had traveled with the count to seek out the old woman in the wilderness. The count strayed away from them in the dark wood at night and continued the next day alone. When darkness came, he climbed a tree to look for the right path. By the light of the moon he saw a figure coming down the mountain. He could see it was the goose girl, the servant daughter of the old woman. How astonished he was when she went to the well, took off the skin and washed her face and herself, and her golden hair fell down. She was more beautiful than anyone had ever seen in the whole world. He had hardly dared to breathe, but stretched his head farther forward through the leaves as he dared to stare at her. He bent too far, and the bough he stood on suddenly cracked. The beautiful girl slipped out of the skin and sprang away and disappeared into the darkness. The count rushed after her. He met the king and queen, and they all continued towards the old woman's little house. The Count told them what wonderful things he had seen by the well, and they did not doubt that the girl was their lost daughter. The geese were sitting all around the little house and sleeping. The king and queen looked in the window and saw the old woman quietly spinning, nodding her head and never looking around. The room was perfectly clean, but they could not see their daughter. They gazed at this for a long time. At last they took heart and knocked softly at the window. The old woman rose and called out quite kindly,
"Come in, you are expected."
When they had entered the room, she said,
"You might have spared yourself the long walk if 3 years ago you had not unjustly driven away your child, who is so good and so lovable. No harm has come to her. For 3 years she has had to tend the geese. With them she learnt no evil, but has preserved her purity of heart. And you have been sufficiently punished by your misery."
Then she went to the stairs and called,
"Come out, my little daughter."
The door opened, and the princess stepped out in her silken garments, with her golden hair and her shining eyes, and it was as if an angel from heaven had entered the room. She went up to her father and mother, fell on their necks and kissed them, and they all wept for joy. The young count stood near them, and when he saw them, she became as red in the face as a moss rose, though she did not know why. The king said, "My dear child, I have given away my kingdom. What can I give you now?"
"She needs nothing," said the old woman. "I give her the tears that she has wept on your account. They are precious and pearls finer than those that are found in the sea, and worth more than your whole kingdom. And I give her my little house as payment for her work."
When the old woman had said that, she disappeared right from their sight. The walls rattled a little, and when the king and queen looked around, the little house had been transformed into a splendid palace. A royal table had been spread, and servants were running here and there. The story keeps going, but my grandmother, who told it to me, had partially lost her memory and had forgotten the rest. I shall always believe that the beautiful princess married the count, and that they remained together in the palace and lived there in happiness for so long as God willed it. Whether the snow geese, which were actually kept near the little house, were really young girls whom the old woman had taken under her protection, and whether they now received their human form again and stayed as handmaidens to the young queen, I do not exactly know, but I suspect it may be true. This much is certain: the old woman was no witch, as people thought. She was a wise woman who meant well. Very likely it was she who, at the princess's birth, gave her the gift of weeping pearls instead of tears. That does not happen these days, or else the poor would soon be rich. Isn't that a great story? Excuse me. It just goes to show that when people are nice and try and help other people, like the wise woman did by gifting the princess with the gift of pearls instead of tears, and gifting her with a palace of her own and a wonderful count to marry, and the count was repaid for all he did to help her by getting the princess and a new life to go, that everything works out wonderfully. That's why it always pays to help people out, because in the end it'll be good for you too. Anyway, I hope you liked that story, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Bye!